Welcome to this month's local history program, Who Knew? Lights, Cameras, Action, History of our local movie theaters. I'm Kathy Bollinger from the local history department of the Community Library of Allegheny Valley. I will be your host. Let's look at some of the first theaters in our local neighborhoods. We'll begin with the early theaters in East Tarentum. Tarentum was a fast-growing community in the late 1800s. Residents welcomed all kinds of entertainment. By the early 1900s, movies became popular. By 1920, motion pictures were sharing the stage with live performances. And by the 1950s, motion pictures and movie theaters were at an all-time high. Let's take a look. Tarentum's first opera house was built by Moses Oppenheimer. It was known as the Opera Block. Built in 1886, it was a cultural center for the area. It took up almost the entire block of Tarentum's Corbett Street. On the second floor was seating for 200. A dance hall and skating rink were in the rear of the building, and multiple businesses were on the first floor. Built on the corner of East 7th Avenue and Corbett Street in Tarentum, this new opera house had a stage that was the largest of any theater between Chicago and New York. It had seating for 1,200 people. The opening play was Our Minister on January 16, 1906. Henry Morgan Brackenridge and his family were in the first box on the main floor. Other boxes were occupied by the Vogler family, the Hemphill family, and the Tarentum Council. The curtain rose at 8:45. It was late because stagehands were not acquainted with all that was needed to be done. The ladies' reception room was on the right and the men's parlor to the left. After the performance, the VIP guests were offered oysters, chicken, and all the delicacies of the season. The New York cast gave 3 cheers for the Tarentum Theater and said they would return next season. The Tarico was renamed the Nixon, January 1907. Its first movie was a talkie movie, July 9, 1913. The building additionally housed a skating rink in the basement that was replaced with a bowling alley and a billiard room. An ice cream parlor was located in a room off the side of the main entrance. Fire gutted the Nixon April 17, 1918. After much renovation, it reopened again as the Harris Theater in 1926. This is a picture of the opening day. The theater was sold to the Stanley Warner Theater chain, and then later sold to the Manus Enterprises, September 1959. It closed later that year. After the building sat empty for a number of years, May 7, 1987, the building was demolished. Pictured here is one of 3 theaters located on Fifth Avenue and Corbett Street. The first was built in 1907 as a vaudeville theater known as the Theatorium. Heavy fire damage destroyed it March 11, 1908. Later, in 1908, June 19th, the Dreamland Theater opened. It was destroyed later that year by a fire as well. In 1909, the Star Theater reopened after being rebuilt on the same location. It existed through 1926. February 4th, 1926, there was a gas explosion fire that destroyed the theater. Theaters were never built again there. Later, this became the site of the future G.C. Murphy store. Our next theater is the People's Theater. It existed from 1910 through 1928. And after being closed for a few years, reopened again in 1940 through 1951. It's located at 310 Fifth Avenue in Toronto. Today, the site is home to Four Square Manufacturing Company. In 1920, one of the most costly pipe organs made for movie theaters was installed, and on February 20th of that year, an organ recital was presented. The theater closed in 1928 and opened a few months later as the Family Theater. Within a few months, that closed, and by 1930s, the building was used for a food storage. Around 1940, it reopened as the People's Theater and existed again till 1951. Add to the left was From the Valley, 1949. Next, we have the Palace Theater from 1920 to 1949. It was located at 321 East Fifth Avenue. The Palace opened February 28, 1920. It was built at a cost of $200,000. With luxurious seating for 560. It also included a tea room, a cigar room, and a confectionery. On opening night, a 5-piece orchestra furnished music for 500 members of the Chamber of Commerce and their wives who attended an opening night reception. The first film shown was a silent film, His Majesty the American, starring Douglas Fairbanks. The Palace was the first theater to offer daily matinees from 1 to 5 for mill workers especially, who could come and enjoy a good motion picture no matter what shift they worked. On the second floor, opening around the same time as the movie theater, was a duck pin bowling. The Trenton Bowlers and the Pittsburgh Bowling League, named the Neiman's, had their very first match there, January 31st, 1920. The Tarentum team was second in the national class and would compete later that year in the national tournament in Peoria, Illinois. Off to your right is an ad, 1949, from the Valley Daily News. The Palace was sold September 15, 1949. It was remodeled to become the remodeled Palace Theater opened as the Manus Theater on Wednesday, January 18, 1950. There was a huge grand opening with a parade, giant searchlights, bands, and thousands of people jammed the downtown. New owners, Ted Manus and his son Mike, were present at the opening. The first ticket was bought by Tarentum's Burgess, V.L. Henry. Women patrons who came received rosebuds in the foyer, and souvenir programs were available for all. The first movie in the new Manus was Adam's Rib with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. In 1954, a new giant screen was installed. Duckpin bowling lanes were still open on the upper floor. In 1978, the Manus closed as a movie theater. It became home to Pennsylvania's state liquor store till the late 1990s, where then it became home to the Family Service Agency from the late 1990s to 2020. The agency's clients were housed on the upper floor if they needed a home. In March 2020, the building was bought and renovated to become an art gallery, known today as the Manus Gallery. West Tarentum had also its own theaters. Let's take a look. This is a Gem Theater located on 205 West 7th Avenue in West Tarentum. It was open from 1913 through World War I. It was the area's first dedicated movie theater. The first movie shown was the silent movie Gentlemen of Fashion in 1913. Here's some ads from the paper. The theater stayed open where it was, but under different names. In 1923, Mr. Hewitt purchased the Gem Theater and renamed it the Grand. It existed as the Grand till 1939, when it was sold again and now becomes the Daytola. It existed from 1939 to 1947. The Daytola was then renamed the Penn. It was open from 1947 to 1955. The building was unoccupied for several years after the Penn closed in 1955. The building was then torn down and became the site of a car lot for Nick Chevrolet. Natrona had 5 movie theaters of its own over the years. One of the early ones was the Dreamland, which I do not have a picture of. It was located on Center Street near Pond Street. It opened from 1910 till 1914. When it was torn down, replaced in its site was a new theater named the Grand. It existed from 1914 to 1929. An interesting note, the Connor sisters worked at the Grand. One sister played the piano, one sang with the pictures, and the other sold tickets. Next theater in Tarentum was the Keystone. It was located on 64 Garfield Street and opened sometime before 1911. Several owners and remodeling. It opened again in 1912 with a seating capacity of 400. During the Depression, it too was closed, but reopened after remodeling until a fire destroyed it February 26, 1938. An interesting fact on this movie theater, it was the first one to show thrilling Saturday afternoon serials, with each week's episode described in the Valley Daily News a few days later. These are ads from the Valley paper in the years 1923. The next theaters were the Liberty and State Theaters, located at 97 River Avenue, opposite Spruce Street. The Liberty was owned by Martin Wygonick, who was also the projectionist. The theater opened with a Paramount film, Dictator, January 1921. Located in the same building as the Liberty and State Theaters, the Roxy was the new name given in the early 1930s. This was the last theater in Natrona. Fire closed the theater on August 2nd, 1959. An interesting note, in the late 30s, when theaters were not allowed to be open on Sunday, the Roxy created a stir by showing Polish movies with a religious theme on Sunday afternoons. The owner of the Roxy was Alex Massano of Natrona Heights. Breckenridge and Natrona Heights both had several theaters of their own. In the Birdville area was the Highland Theater. It existed through 1949. It was located where Strobel's Carpeting used to be next to McDonald's. In the Breckenridge area, I have no picture, but the Luna Theater was on Breckenridge Avenue. It opened in 1918. Shortly after that was the Valley Theater that existed through 1952. Both theaters were thought to be on the lower end of Brackenridge Avenue, closest to the mill. Not much is known about either theater. Today, there are still several old-time theaters still open. The first on the upper left is the Casino Theater in Vandergrift. It no longer shows movies, but it does offer live events and actually can be rented out. On the upper right is the Oaks Theater in Oakmont. It does show old movies and new movies and offers live events. On the bottom, we have the Palace Theater in Greensburg. It offers live concerts and other live events. You can't forget theaters without remembering drive-ins. Drive-ins were popular in our neighborhood in the early 1950s. There were at least 4 in the AK Valley open at the same time. The first local drive-in we'll look at is the Sunset Drive-In, located on the junction of Route 28 and 908 in Natrona Heights. It existed from 1955 to 1989. As you can see in this ad, in the Valley Daily newspaper, May 2nd, 1957, Tuesday and Wednesday were buck night. For $1, you could have a whole carload. Today, number 1 Cochran dealership is located in the former site of the Sunset Drive-In. A second local drive-in we may remember is located at the bottom of Logan's Ferry Road in New Kensington, known as the Gateway Drive-In. It existed from 1950 through 1990. On the upper right, you'll see an ad from the Pittsburgh Press from 1983. In 1990, it was demolished. The next local drive-in is the Family Drive-In. It was located on 3150 Leechburg Road in Laurel Borough. Here's a couple shots of the marquee about the time of the late 40s, early 50s, with an ad from the Valley from May 2nd, 1950. When the drive-in was no longer there, the site was taken over by the Penny's and Montgomery Ward's stores. Today, it is the home of the U-Haul rental. The last local drive-in is today's Riverside Drive-In, still open and running strong. It originally opened as Lee's Woodland Drive-In in 1949 and remained open till 1978. It's located between Leechburg and Apollo on Route 66. Closed for a short time, it reopened again in 1995, named the Galaxy Drive-In. It closed September 26, 2004. June 20th, 2005, it reopened as we know it today, the Riverside Drive-In. Here is a picture of what it looks like now, and its opening feature then was Herbie the Love Bug. The Riverside Drive-In is one of the few drive-ins left open in Pennsylvania today. 25 to be exact, as of June 2021. From about 4,000 drive-ins at their peak in the 50s in the United States, today there are only 325 still open. Let's take a look at some films shot locally. See if you can identify these films shot in our local community. 1981 George Romero film shot in Fawn Township in Natrona. 。 . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . Did you see Night Riders? A 1993 film with Bruce Willis and Sarah Jessica Parker. Some of the river chase scenes were shot at the Natrona Lock. Striking Distance. 2001 film shot in Tarentum. Some of the scenes were shot at the old Tarentum Library on 6th Avenue. Did you guess Out of the Black? A 2008 film made from Michael Chambon's book of the same name. Mysteries of Pittsburgh. Some other films that have been done in our area that you may not have realized was Inspector Gadget, 1998, at the PPG Plaza. 2007, Adventureland was filmed at Kennywood. 2011, Tom Cruise was the star in the Jack Reacher film, shot in Sewickley. And more recently, 2018, was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks. Fourth Avenue in Tarentum, and it was a Netflix series that's still on today. In addition to films, Pittsburgh has been a location of choice for many series and TV shows. The ABC comedy series Downward Dog was filmed in Pittsburgh, May 17, 2017. Filming now is A League of Our Own, an Amazon Prime TV series adaptation of the Penny Marshall 1992 film of the same name. Pennsylvania has limited tax credit available for productions. Many times this is the determining factor if the film is shot in Pittsburgh or not. Some competitor states, such as Georgia, have no cap on tax credits available. For every dollar given in tax credit, approximately $218 is recouped in money spent in the area. A great return. Hopefully, Pennsylvania will change its tax credit practices. The resources used for this presentation are listed here. All of them are available in our local library. Thank you for viewing today's presentation. I hope you'll join us again for another Who Knew next month.